Hey everyone! Have you ever thought about how ancient people imagined what happens after we die? Today, let's talk about the Mesopotamians and their beliefs about the afterlife. Unlike the ancient Egyptians, who left us detailed instructions for navigating the afterlife, the Mesopotamians didn't have a single guidebook. Instead, their ideas are scattered across stories, artifacts, and traditions. To understand what they believed, we have to piece together clues from many different sources. Some stories, like the famous Epic of Gilgamesh, explore the meaning of death and what happens to the soul. Other writings, often used in rituals for ghosts or dying gods, add even more details. A few well-known stories include Gilgamesh, Enkidu, and the netherworld, Ishtar's descent to the netherworld, and Nergal and Ereshkigal. But that's not all. Archaeologists have found inscriptions on graves, records of funeral costs, and even old letters that give us hints about how the Mesopotamians thought about death. These sources come from different times and cultures, including the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, showing us how their beliefs changed and grew over time. One thing is clear, their ideas about the afterlife weren't the same for everyone or every period. Social class, religious practices, and cultural shifts all influence their views. But even with all these changes, there's a common thread that helps us understand how they imagined the afterlife. The Mesopotamians thought of the netherworld as the opposite of the heavens. It was like a shadowy, quieter version of life on Earth. They believed it was close by, just beneath the ground, but it felt far away and dark. Sometimes they called it the land of no return, or the house which no one leaves. It sounds pretty gloomy, with descriptions of dusty doors and a place that's hard to escape. But not all stories make it sound so bad. In one tale, when a ruler named Urnama arrives in the netherworld, the spirits there celebrate and feast, showing moments of joy. The Mesopotamians also believed their sun god, Shamash, traveled through the netherworld every night during his journey across the sky. Some scholars think symbols on graves, especially those connected to the goddess Inanna or Ishtar, show hopes for a better afterlife. Ishtar herself made a famous trip to the underworld and came back. While regular people couldn't do the same, they might have used symbols of Ishtar to avoid some of the hardships of the afterlife. The netherworld wasn't a place of extreme happiness or misery. It was more like a faded version of life. One description talks about a huge underground city with 7 walls and gates where the spirits of the dead lived. In the story of Ishtar's descent, she passes through these gates, taking off her jewelry and clothes as she goes, until she enters the city completely bare. Some think this might be why some funerals lasted 7 days, reflecting her journey through the gates. This shadowy world, called We-ilu in Akkadian or Ganzar in Sumerian, was ruled by powerful gods. Ereshkigal, the mistress of the Great Earth, was its queen, but later myths also mention Nergal, a warrior god, as her partner. To combine the stories, they're sometimes portrayed as husband and wife. Like the gods in heaven, the underworld rulers had a council of divine helpers, called the Anunnaki, to make decisions. It's important to remember that the Mesopotamian netherworld wasn't like the idea of hell many people think of today. It wasn't about punishment or reward, and your behavior in life didn't decide where you ended up. Instead, it was simply where everyone went if their bodies and graves were cared for properly. This gives us a unique view of how the Mesopotamians thought about death, as a natural part of life, tied to rituals and a sense of balance in the universe. And the Mesopotamians had a really unique way of looking at life, death, and what happens afterward. According to an old story called the Atrahasis epic, humans were made by mixing clay with the blood of a rebellious god named We-ilu. This made people a mix of the earthly and the divine. Sounds cool, right? But here's the catch. Even though they had a touch of divinity, humans weren't immortal. The god Enki, known for his wisdom and magic, made sure of that. From the start, humans were destined to die. They even called death going to one's fate. A famous story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, shows how trying to live forever was pointless. Instead, they believed the best way to live on was through leaving a legacy. good deeds and accomplishments that people would remember. So how did they define being alive? As long as you had blood flowing and could breathe, you were alive. Once those stopped, your body became an empty shell. They thought of death as falling into a deep sleep, and eventually the body would return to clay just like it started. You might recognize a similar idea from the Bible. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. But here's the twist. Death wasn't the end. The Mesopotamians believed in a spirit called the eṭemmu, kind of like a ghost. It came from the blood of We-ilu, giving it intelligence and a divine connection. The eṭemmu wasn't like the idea of a soul floating away. It stayed closely tied to the body, even needing food and drink. Here's the tricky part. The eṭemmu didn't just exist inside you while you were alive. Some stories suggest it only appeared after death, almost as if it was created when you died. Either way, death was seen as a process, a journey. And this journey wasn't easy. After someone died, their iṭemmu had to make its way to the netherworld. But the road was full of challenges. Without proper burial and mourning rituals, the spirit couldn't move on. It had to cross a dangerous steppe filled with demons, get across the Kubur River with a guide's help, and pass through 7 gates guarded by gatekeepers. Each step required the right rituals to make it through. Once the spirit reached the netherworld, it faced a sort of judgment. But this wasn't about good or bad behavior. It was more like checking into a new place. The spirit's spot in the afterlife depended on their social status while alive and how well their family cared for their body and grave. Just like in life, the afterlife had its hierarchies. Kings stayed rulers, and priests stayed priests. Even family size mattered. The more kids you had, the better, because they could perform more rituals and make more offerings to keep your spirit comfortable. Speaking of offerings, they were a big deal. The eṭemmu still needed food and drink, but the netherworld didn't have much to offer. Without help from the living, the spirit would struggle, reduced to begging. That's why the job of taking care of these rituals often fell to the eldest son. He inherited both the duty and a bigger share of the family's property. If the living didn't do their part, the ghost could become restless and cause trouble, like making people sick or bringing bad luck. But it wasn't all scary. A well-cared-for spirit could stay peaceful and even help the living. This balance between the living and the dead showed how connected their worlds were. The Mesopotamians even created rituals and charms to deal with restless ghosts and keep harmony. So, to sum it up, the Mesopotamians didn't think of death as the end. It was more like moving into a new phase, where the living and the dead still depended on each other. Their beliefs reflected a society that valued family, rituals, and keeping order, even after death. It's amazing how their ideas about life and the afterlife still make us think about our own connections and legacies.